All right, well, thank you very much to Robert and his team for the opportunity to present today about the WADNA Bank and the past and present and future of biobanking in Western Australia. And hopefully some of the topics I talk about resonate with people. And the WADNA Bank is associated with the University of Western Australia and the Perkins Institute. As you can see there, this is the Perth CBD in Elizabeth Quay, and this photo here is the Perkins building located at Fiona Stanley Hospital. So briefly, I just wanted to touch on biobanking in the past in WA, and most people might be able to recognise a few of these things. Biobanking has transformed considerably in the past 25 years. Initial collections were not formally biobanked, but rather they were private cohorts of patient or research samples. Usually that was in the form of boxes covered in years of snow at the back of an old freezer in an abandoned building somewhere on campus, coupled with poor ethics and pretty much no governance structure, limited and insecure data practices, cumbersome and risk-susceptible sample storage practices, no regard for space considerations and insurance requirements. One thing that the DNA Bank, and I think most people would be aware of, are the best practices and guidelines available. And certainly internationally, the ISBA best practices recommendations for repositories is something that most biobanks should be aware of. Here in Australia, nationally, the National Health and Medical Research Council brought out the Biobank's information paper in 2010. And certainly that is complemented by the University of New South Wales with its Biorepository certification program. And also the WA state government brought out guidelines OD 299 around the same time for human biobanks, genetic research databases and associated data. So all of these resources form the basis and direction, I think, of a well-structured and governed biobanking initiative. So what is a biobank or a biorepository? Well, it's a formalised, sustainable, large collection of biological samples, which is linked to personal and health information, and it's for commercial and medical research purposes. The categories of biobank that I'm aware of are a mono-user biobank, which supports single research projects, oligo-user biobanks, which support several research projects and which may have no external distribution or distribution through its custodians only, and a poly-user biobank, which support unspecified research projects and is open access. So I'll touch on in the next few slides a bit of a brief history of the WADNA Bank. First of all, the WADNA Bank was initially funded by an NHMRC grant, an enabling grant from 2006 to 2013, and that was for the sum of approximately $1.9 million. In the proposal, it was to build a new national resource for medical research that will both underpin and enhance the national health and medical research efforts in Australia by systematically enabling world-class biobanking capacities and hence the population-based resources in WA for genetic epidemiological research. The WADNA Bank was also proposed to provide national access to WA biospecimen resources and facilitate collaboration and research into national priority diseases and childhood and adulthood. So back in 2006, it was fairly ambitious to set this up. I think, but there was a nice influx of money to do that. It was set up with pretty much a who's who of science in Perth, and some of you might be able to recognise these names, certainly Professor Fiona Stanley and Professor Peter Klinken, very heavily involved in that. The Biobank was operationalised and maintained as a biobanking service in Western Australia, and as I said, to facilitate sample collection, handling and storage of biosamples in both basic research and clinical trial initiatives, and that really hadn't been offered before. So this was really quite a new thing for WA. And it was funded, as I would call, an infrastructure model, and that will become apparent fairly soon. The biobank was well utilised by selected researchers across WA and studies during this time, and the infrastructure was located at multiple hospital sites across Perth. In my conversations in the last few years, talking to people in Melbourne and Sydney and so forth, they agree that it was seen as well positioned, the WA DNA Bank, and set up in the Australian biobanking landscape. However, that NHMRC funding ceased in 2013, and because of that, a cost recovery model was proposed to users. Now, as you can probably guess, predictably, users that had been relying on this service for many years at negligible or no cost decided to withdraw. So, unfortunately, coupled with significant staff and personnel changes, the DNA Bank then faced uncertainty of continuation. There was a change in head of department, which took over the WA DNA Bank, which went into which proposed a hybrid select customer-funded cost recovery model. So there were two large studies that primarily focused, that primarily funded the positions to run the DNA Bank, and it provided biosamples processing and storage needs for these researchers primarily, but other researchers were able to use for storage only. Between 2013 and 17, this was a year-to-year proposition reliant on those large studies to continue to fund the model. And the location of the DNA Bank was changed to Royal Perth Hospital and Sir Charles Gairdner Hospitals. So in 2018, as it was mentioned, I was employed to take over the WA DNA Bank. And in coming, I immediately reviewed the operations and services provided or not provided, as the case may be. The cost recovery model was altered to reflect a fee-for-service model, and we were still relying on existing funding relationships from primary studies. That was altered because on review, you could see that just the services that were being provided were not being adequately paid for by customers. So we needed to increase revenue. And so that was able to happen through fees and services and subscriptions. In mid-late 2019, there was another department restructure through UWA, unfortunately, and consequently the withdrawal of these primary studies was due to the uncertainty of the DNA Bank. And so along with that, in January 2020, as we all know, COVID-19 hit, and that caused a few issues for the DNA Bank. However, in March 2020, I was contacted to operationalise sample collection, handling and storage of biospecimens for a COVID research response biobank initiated by the state government funded to UWA. The collections involved buffy coats, plasma, serum, urine and packed gene RNA, and continued the COVID research response for 6 months, utilising both new open specimen and WADNA Bank infrastructures to fulfil these contractual obligations. The COVID research response was ceased in mid-2021 at the end of grant funding, and biospecimens are property of the WA Metropolitan Health Service. In this time, I also relocated the laboratory to the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research at the Fiona Stanley Hospital site in university space. So currently, what is happening with the WA DNA Bank? Well, the DNA Bank I would class as an oligo user biobank. So we have up to 100,000 samples with 10 plus studies, and these are generally only available to the custodians or are available to anyone else through the custodians. So that's where I would class us as an oligo user biobank. Like I said, we're located at Fiona Stanley Hospital and Royal Perth Hospital with the freezers only there. The samples we have included whole blood, buffy coats, plasma, serum, packed gene, urine and saliva, along with DNA and RNA, and as I mentioned, owned and distributed by the custodians. The WA DNA Bank now offers a full fee-for-service model, so that's extending a diverse range of services to facilitate and support biobanking sample processing and experimental design sample requirements for customers from the university, hospital, and commercial research entities. So I'm pretty much open to anyone who's looking to do biobanking or has any requirements in terms of how to do sample collection or storage. I'm very happy to be involved and help in anyone's research if they ask. We're now fairly financially stable and viable, and we offer comprehensive sample to storage consultation and solutions, a variety of biosample processing and storage options with the flexibility and experience to tailor requirements to individual projects. We have an integrated LIMS system called the ARC and services for researchers who require short and long-term sample storage and allocation in lieu of buying and setting up own infrastructure, such as, everyone wants to buy their own freezer, but not everyone needs to buy their own freezer. So we do offer shelf-to-shelf sample storage options. We have a range of customizable and specialised equipment to efficiently handle and process biospecimens for its customers, which include a suite of precision robotics for oil extraction, handling and quantitation requirements. And we have over 20 years of laboratory and research experience to consult for appropriate sample collection, processing and storage for future research activities. Some of our services at the moment include long-term storage of clinical trial samples, only at -80 for up to 8 years post-trial completion, whole blood genomic DNA extraction, high throughput scale, fecal sample processing on our QIAsymphony robotics. We have smaller and large scale nucleic acid extractions of blood and saliva and other tissues using the QIAcube and again, the QIAsymphony. Tissue disruption and preparation, 96 and 384 well PCR preparation on the QIAgility robotics, any type of nucleic acid quantitation you require using Qubit 4 or the TapeStation 2200 instruments. I also offer things like freezer defrost schedules, and organisation and allocation of samples, transport of biological samples, whether it be local, national or international, even down to the aliquot and sample preparation services for downstream analysis. And one of our contacts is the Australian Genome Research Facility. Some of the projects we store and service for at the WA DNA Bank are the sleep studies, WA melanoma health, WA schizophrenia family study, mesothelioma studies, colchicine and chronic coronary disease, gestational diabetes, and also work for the Australian National Phenome Centre. And here is just a couple of pictures of some of the equipment we have in the lab. Our QIAsymphony is a workhorse, the QIAgility and the QIAcube, all the standard range of centrifuges and so forth, and the TapeStation. So where is biobanking in WA now? And these are my views. Since 2017, within Western Australia, there's been a number of collective efforts to consolidate and standardise biobanking practices. And it currently operates with no formal biobanking qualification and accreditation. So I say that in terms of ISO accreditations and so forth. It's still very siloed. There's a lot of people who would like to just stay doing their own thing. And that's fair enough. But what I have noticed is there are very significant changes in attitudes and ideas surrounding things like ethics and governance, sample collection, handling and storage, equipment service contracts, use of LIMS, data handling and security, insurance requirements of housing biosamples, which is a very big one actually, and ISO standards and guidelines for biobanking. So where do we see biobanking in WA in the future? Well, in the last 6 months, there's been a very comprehensive audit in biobanking in WA undertaken by Dr. Craig Willers on behalf of the WA State Government. And the key aims of that was to ensure the model's governance is inclusive, transparent and accountable, driving developments on quality, scalability, flexibility, sharing and ongoing use, optimising the quality, harmonisation and interoperability in WA biobanking, creating quality management, education and training tools for WA biobanks, sharing an informatics solution for biobank data management, providing collection, processing and storage services in collaboration through PathWest, establishing a state-of-the-art statewide biobank at the QE2 Medical Campus, which is located in Nedlands at the Sir Charles Gardner Hospital site, and embedding biobanking operations in the health system to improve and sustain biobanking research through the full scope of the WA research sector. And from this, a significant national critical research infrastructure grant application has been submitted called WA Bedrock, and this would be providing substantial funding to harmonise and consolidate biobanking within West Australia going forward for the university and the health sectors. So where do I see the WA DNA Bank and the future? Well, the WA DNA Bank will continue to provide biobanking and lab services to university and health initiatives on a fee-for-service basis. I'm very keen to keep that going. I'd love to add a liquid nitrogen setup to the WA DNA Bank and other sample processing services where possible. The constraints there of liquid nitrogen are basically space requirements. As everyone experiences, freezers and liquid nitrogen tanks take a lot of space, and there's just nothing available for me at the moment. And of course, to integrate into the new state biobanking initiative. Potentially, I'd like to explore personal business ventures to set up and provide dedicated cold chain biosample logistics and freezer farm services for research and commercial interests. And something similar to the cryosite facility in Sydney, Australia. And you can see their wonderful facility at www.cryosite.com. But of course, it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. Just one last thing I'd like to plug is what people might be aware of or might not be aware of is this qualification in biorepository science. It is offered to people who would like to get a qualification in biorepository science through ISBA and the American Society of Clinical Pathology. You can see all the information you need and eligibility and application links through ISBA or the ASCP website. And what this is it assesses all aspects of biobanking from ethics and governance to standard laboratory practices. It's a 50-question multiple choice exam. And if you've been in science long enough, it should be fairly straightforward, I would say. But it is something that I think is important going forward for people in biobanking. And I was awarded this in October 2022. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and listening. And again, thank Robert and his team for the opportunity to talk about the WA DNA Bank and biobanking in WA. I'm very happy to be contacted via my work email or through LinkedIn. And like I said, I'm always happy to chat about whatever services you might require or any consultation. Always happy to help. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. If you have any questions, you can put your questions in the question and answer section. And in the meanwhile, we have two questions. One from Birenta. Which samples you prefer for DNA isolation?
Sorry, which samples do we process for DNA isolation? Was that the question?
Which samples do you prefer?
I prefer.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, genomic DNA, I will process from anything from whole blood to buffy coats to tissue. Done some DNA genomic extractions from fecal. Pretty much, if you can get DNA from it, I will work out a way of trying to help out if your needs for that. So, but generally it's whole blood or buffy coats at the moment. And early on, I did a lot of manual saliva extraction of DNA, but now I've incorporated a QIAGEN saliva kit into our robotics. So it sort of it gives it more of a high throughput and quality control.
The next question is from Robert. So can you say a little about how your subscription scheme works for your biobank? Did different departments subscribe for biobanking services? Was this well received?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that question. It was breaking up.
Can you say a little about how your subscription schemes worked for your biobank? Is the first.
That's a great question. So anyone who's been in this space knows that I think subscriptions are hard to, I guess, service people. What I've found is that I had a number of subscriptions already involved with the DNA Bank, and they've continued. In the new WA Biobanking initiative, a couple of years ago, there's been a couple of iterations when subscriptions have been mentioned. People seem to not want to be tied down or subscribed to a statewide initiative for a variety of reasons, I suppose. There's never enough money in science, and people are very careful with their money. And I think sometimes the subscriptions are seen to be not so much. I wouldn't call it a waste of money, but it is. There's no perceived value there for whatever reason. I certainly think they're a great idea, and the subscriptions I have encompass all things from consultation, sample preparation, and the LIMS involved, because of course I have to hire a data manager to run a lot of that stuff. So I think subscriptions are important in biobanking. However, the cost and the availability of certain services needs to be well thought of. Otherwise, people tend to run.
Thank you. So there's another question. Do you receive many requests from industries, and are they from biotechs or pharma?
I've only had
Asia, Europe, or America.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't had any requests from industry outside of Australia. But locally, I've had some work done, like I said, for the Australian Genome Research Facility, and also the Australian National Phenome Centre, who I would class as the most, I guess, commercial entities that I've been involved with. Otherwise, there is clinical researchers or basic researchers who require types of collection for clinical trial or their research. But I'm always happy to talk to any person or entity that requires the services that we provide. I think we can always find a way of getting what they need done, and certainly welcome, again, any contact towards that.
How will the roles of Western Australia DNA Biobank and statewide biobank differ? Will statewide take care of the sample requests, for example?
That would be the goal, looking at the audit that was done and the Bedrock grant. It would look to consolidate all biobanking in Western Australia across all university sectors and hospitals. And that's how I understand the model is being proposed. That's a very big job to undertake. And at the moment, if there are samples or if there is a request to be involved with the DNA bank, that's a sort of a one-to-one conversation. I think in a completely consolidated biobanking setup, the state would run that service, and then the other biobanks would be a part of that.
There's another question from Abdurrahman. Are you planning to certify your biobanking activities in the near future?
Yes, I would love to. I've just redone all my SOPs, which is very exciting, as you can imagine. However, to achieve things like ISO accreditation and NATA accreditation, that would be fantastic. Unfortunately, I'm pretty much a one-man band at the moment. So there's me, and then there's my data manager. And so I'm governed, I guess, by University of Western Australia in terms of lab spaces and things like that. Accreditation, while it is something that I would love to be able to do, I think at the moment, it's just not possible for me. But certainly, again, with the WA initiative, this would be a lot easier to do with teams of people.
And what is aliquot quantity of DNA?
What is the aliquot quantity? So I guess it depends. But if you're looking at a whole blood extraction, I'd be looking at a 500 microliter aliquot, and that would be easily 200 to 300 micrograms per microliter. It really does depend on the sample. Again, when we did some fecal samples not long ago, we got very, very small amounts of DNA, but that was fine for the customer. So it just depends on what your sampling is and what you're going to use it for downstream.
Any more questions? Yes, that's about it. So thank you for your presentation. And if there are any questions, then we can reach out to you.
Oh, certainly. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you.